And we're going to be talking this evening about undiscovered treasures of Assisi, frescoes, tabernacles, small tabernacles, votive shrines, things you actually probably walked past without taking particular notice. And we're going to note these little gems of Assisi tonight in this talk, which is called Assisi's Medieval Street Art, From the Sacred to the Grotesque. Much of it is sacred, a good amount of it is grotesque, and we're going to learn about that as I give my talk. Okay, so
can you see the slide?
Pardon me? I would like to just, okay, I'm ready to go. So we'll be talking about, again, the street art of Assisi. We're going to start with sacred images, not conclude with sacred images, however. And many of you have been to Assisi or been with me in Assisi on guided tours, and you can see this medieval gem right here. It is on the flanks of Mount Subasio. Here you see the foothills behind Assisi. And at the top, you notice the 14th century fortress. Assisi is part, of course, the region of Umbria. Umbria was part of the Papal States from the 15th century to the unification of Italy in 1860. The Papal fortress at the top of the town is called the Rocca Maggiore, the Big Rock. This is a view of Assisi from the west. And if you arrive in Assisi, coming from Perugia, beautiful medieval hill town to the west of us, you will enter the town through the Porta San Francesco. I've got a red circle around it. The medieval arch called Porta San Francesco. Porta literally means a door. Assisi's walls open up into the surrounding countryside through 8 medieval doors or medieval arches. This one is called Porta San Francesco because it's nearest the Basilica di San Francesco. What you're seeing in the photo actually is the massive fortress-like Sacro Convento or Holy Monastery where the Franciscans live. About 90 Franciscans are now an active community here at the Basilica. You can see the bell tower of the Basilica of St. Francis. So when you walk through this arch, let's see, the first thing you'll see before you enter it is a fresco on the left. And we can see the fresco in this image to the left. It bears the coat of arms and the rearing lion, which are the symbols of Assisi. Together they form the coat of arms of Assisi. The cross and the rearing lion are flanking another symbol, and that is the coat of arms of a pope who was French, born in France, Urban V. He was Benedictine, a very devout man, very dedicated to reform, very dedicated to developing spirituality, both in his fellow brothers, the Benedictines, and in Christians and other people in general. And he was Pope during the Avignon papacy. The popes had transferred to Avignon for political reasons in the 14th century, and they were in Avignon for about 70 years. He was Pope actually during the Avignon papacy. This fresco dates from the time of his papacy. It is mid-14th century. The artist is Pace di Bartolo, Tuscan fresco painter who might have studied under the famous Giotto, who frescoes in our Basilica of Assisi. As you enter the arch, on the left is the fresco. Look at the slide to the right here. Through the arch, you can see a little image on a wall, and it's this image right here. This is an outdoor votive image, both fresco and maiolica, actually, and it is dedicated to the Blessed Virgin holding the Christ child. It's not terribly old. It's only about 100 years old. The image in the niche is maiolica, double-fired ceramics. The town of Deruta in Umbria is famous for its maiolica production, but also Orvieto and Gubbio, other Umbrian hill towns, are famous for their maiolica. The image is only about 100 years old. It was done by Americo Lunghi, whose father was from Assisi. There's still many Lunghis. I know some Lunghis in Assisi today. And his mother, however, was from Deruta. She was a Grazia. Grazia is one of the most famous of the ceramic factories of Umbria still today. And Americo Lunghi, when he directed the Grazia business, had the idea of transferring sacred images to Maiolica. In other words, not just using the ceramics to produce vases, cups, pitchers, etc., trays, but to produce beautiful sacred images. And there are about, quite a number, maybe 8 Americo Lunghi, edicola, little niches with Maiolica in Assisi. You can see the drapery around this image. It is red and blue, colors of nobility. The drapery is fresco and probably frescoed between the 16th and 18th century. What does this tell us? In that niche, there's always been a sacred image, or there had been for many centuries, maybe a statue. The sacred images were along the routes that the pilgrims walked as they went through Assisi. This is right near the Basilica of St. Francis. And let me just go back to the image. We have the Madonna with Christ's child. The inscription below, by the way, is the Hail Mary in Latin, Ave Maria, etc. On the right, you can see a white cross and the rearing lion, again, the symbol of Assisi. On the left is a cross, and it's the symbol of Francis. Now, this image is a detail, it's a copy of a detail of the marvelous fresco by Pietro Lorenzetti, early 14th century, which is in the lower Basilica of Assisi. We've met this fresco in one of my other talks. I believe on the Basilica. I believe also on the one about images in art, history of art depicted through paintings and so forth. And in this image, we see the Christ child asking his mother, "Whom shall I bless?" She says, "Pick him." Francis covers his chest as if to say, "Who, me?" But we can see that he's more than worthy to be on Mary's right. He's on her right. In paradise, he had the stigmata of the wounds of Christ. On her left, in secondary position, is John, the beloved apostle, looking very puzzled. Look at those furrowed eyebrows. Because generally, he's on Mary's right in a fresco image. Not here. He's a secondary position. He's giving the gesture for, you win some, you lose some. Pazienza. Hand uplifted, shoulders shrugging, pazienza. Down on the right, the patron who paid for it. Over here on the left was his wife. She was lost, part of the fresco, disappeared over the centuries. I'm standing in front of this image of the Madonna with child with Manuela Elisei, and she is a young woman in Assisi who's been restoring frescoes since 1988. She's extremely talented. She's restored many of the frescoes of Assisi. Some of those we'll meet this evening, as well as done work at Ostia Antica, the Roman port city, Campo dei Fiori in Rome. She's restored in Milan. She's a very, very capable young fresco restorer. And it was a pleasure to walk Assisi with her and see some of her fresco restoration masterpieces. She was very proud of this one. Now, this is situated at a place in Assisi. That corner is called Il Crocicchio, the little crossroads, because it's an important point in Assisi. To our back, as we look at this, is the Basilica of St. Francis. To our left, going up the street, is the Bishop's Palace, then the Basilica of St. Clare. To our right, going down the street, is the Abbey Church of San Pietro, Benedictine. And you can see it right here. Here's the image of the Madonna enthroned with child, the drapery around it. And this is the Benedictine Church of San Pietro, oldest church in Assisi. Documents dated to the 11th century. There aren't many churches in Assisi or convents or monasteries that aren't Franciscan. We don't have anything that's Dominican, Augustinian, Jesuit in Assisi. We do have a couple Benedictine edifices. One is this church, and there are 2 other chapels. Why? Well, Benedict was here long before Francis. Francis was born in 1182, Benedict in the 5th century. He's an Umbrian saint. He's from the city, was born in the city of Norcia. By the way, he's also declared for European Catholics the patron saint of Europe. So from the Crocicchio, you may walk uphill to the Basilica of St. Francis, and the pilgrims would be stopping first, maybe at that little Madonna, say a prayer, continuing on up to the Basilica of St. Francis. From there, they might be heading to the Basilica of St. Clare, where she's buried across town, 13th century. And serious pilgrims will continue on, heading up to the Cathedral of San Rufino at the top of the town, where the patron saint of Assisi is buried. And you might say, oh, I thought Francis was buried in his basilica. There's a trick here. He's not the patron saint of Assisi. He's the patron saint of Italy. The patron saint of Assisi is San Rufino, first Christian bishop, martyred in 238 AD, and buried in the Cathedral of San Rufino. So these are all important pilgrimage sites in Assisi, and these frescoed images, these little shrines, all the way marked stopping places for the pilgrims as they walk quietly through the town, perhaps saying their rosaries. And Manuel Elise told me that when they went from, in the Middle Ages, from the Abbey Church of San Pietro, by the way, the head of a Benedictine order is called an abbot. A Benedictine church is called an abbey. They walked or they crawled on their knees from the Abbey Church of San Pietro up the hill to the Basilica of St. Francis. Now, edicola, that little virgin was in a niche that we call an edicola. This is an edicola. This is a Roman edicola. The Roman arches, the Roman city gates had a edicola on the sides for what's called divinita minori, minor divinities, minor deities. The major deities, the major divinities had temples constructed to them in their honor. You can see the edicola here on the left, and this is the porta, the city gate of the Roman city in Jordan, which I visited with my son Keegan years ago, an extraordinary trip that was. Also to be in Petra with Keegan, who's a geologist, was something unbelievable. But our guide that day, as he took us to see this Roman city, showed us the city gate dedicated to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century AD. And on the left was an edicola. The edicola modifies over the centuries, and when Roman deities are replaced by Christian saints, saints' images appear in the edicolae. And here's a little edicola. Edicola, by the way, comes from the word aede in Latin, which means temple. So edicola is a mini little temple. Edicola can be on roadways. They're often places where there was a car accident. Maybe that person's life was saved. So an edicola is put up as an ex voto, a thanks for a favor received. This little edicola is along the road heading to Giovannino's restaurant right near our house. And it is to remember and to thank the Lord for the people who were not hurt by the highway robber Cinicchio, who rampaged throughout this countryside in the 19th century. And this edicola was actually made by a relative. This is only maybe about 40 years ago, made by a relative, a descendant of the Spadaglini noble family who lived in this area. Up in the corner, we see Francis with Christ's blessing. Saints up in the corner means it's their soul. These are deceased saints. This is a little edicola, little mini shrine outside the city of Assisi. And sometimes you see women walking from Assisi to the little shrine, arms together, clutching flowers that they're bringing to her, almost a little mini procession from the Assisi city gate to this little edicola. Again, a little mini temple, a little mini shrine. And then they'll return, entering the city of Assisi once again at Porta Perlici. This is the most eastern tip of the city of Assisi. This is one of the 14 porte, or city gates, in the 8 perimeter of medieval walls, which still surrounds Assisi. Just inside the gate on the left is a little edicola constructed by the man who lived in that house. He is a stonemason, and he's put a little statue of the Blessed Virgin in there. There's fresh flowers and everything. And he's called her the Madonna di Porta Perlici. He's named her Our Lady of the City Gate of Porta Perlici. There's another edicola up the street about 40 yards, up on the walls. Again, this is quite contemporary, another Madonna. And let me just point something out here. Not too far away is a lovely little edicola in a back street done by an elderly gentleman called Marcello, who's deceased, I hear. He was over 90. I remember him working in his workshop. He worked in stone, and he made this delightful little edicola. I think it's lovely. He used simple wood from old furniture, he told me. This is an old lock from an old door, just to put at the tip here. This is a fossil stone of the mountain, which he put here, and there were always plants. Right near Marcello's little edicola to the Madonna enthroned is the Rossi family's edicola. This is Francesca. She's pointing up to this image of the Madonna. This is a 17th century image by a painter called Giacomo Marinelli, which she and her family paid to restore. It was restored also by Manuel Elise, who you've already met, the young restorer's photo I showed you. And this is an image. Francesca lamented to me, Manuela told me the same thing. The colors are lost, very lost in this fresco. Here's the baby Jesus, you can hardly see him. And Manuela knows very well that when you restore a fresco nowadays, you cannot repaint. That was allowed up till about the 19th, 18th century. Nowadays, to restore is simply to clean with non-chemical solvents, not repaint. This is a little family edicola, not far from the Cathedral of San Rufino. It's in a back street. You can see this nice pointed arch is 13th century. This is an image of Francis of Assisi. It's actually just a print, and it's a copy. Look at Francis's face, and you're going to see it right here. It's a copy of the image of Francis, which is in the famous fresco by Cimabue in the lower basilica, frescoed in 1280. The Francis next to the Madonna enthroned with angels, a beautiful example of Byzantine art. He's Giotto's teacher. But Giotto is going to outdo the master. Giotto is going to launch us into contemporary art in three-dimensional perspective. Cimabue is a master of Byzantine art. So this is, have a look at this face, Cimabue's San Francesco. We always recognize that face. That's Cimabue's San Francesco. Except Americo Lunghi, in this edicola, he has taken artistic license, if you will. He's changed the image because he has Francis holding open his tunic to show us the sword wound of Christ in his side, thus proving that he had the stigmata. This was commissioned from Americo Lunghi by the Marcolini family in 1926 to celebrate the 700th anniversary of the death of Francis, October 3rd, 1226. This was commissioned in 1926. And here we have this inscription, Pax Huic Domui. Pax Huic Domui, excuse me. Peace to those who live in this house. I took this photo the other day. I was walking around looking at some of the edicolae. This is the same one we just saw of Cimabue. There's some tourists there. They're about to go under this arch. This is a beautiful walk down to the Basilica of St. Francis through the back streets. Just to the left of this young man's hand is this fountain. And they took this picture for me. I was filling my water bottle at the fountain, and I was glad to have them take it because I want to show you another type of the street art of Assisi, not just in fresco, not just in maiolica, but in stone. This is the local limestone of Assisi. Someone, I don't know who or when, sculpted the coat of arms of the city of Assisi, the cross, and the rearing lion. And you see it again and again throughout our town. Sometimes in fresco, sometimes in maiolica, and in this case, in the local limestone. This is another Americo Lunghi masterpiece. I'm sorry about this red here. That's my error, the scribble. This is the Madonna enthroned with child. This dates from 1930, and this was commissioned by Bonaventura Mariani, who at the time was Father General of the Franciscan Order. And he wanted an edicola to adorn the walls in front of the new church of Assisi called the Chiesa Nuova, which you can see right here. Chiesa Nuova, how new? Built in 1613. That's new for Assisi. There were edifices there before because this is said to be a sacred site built over the place where the home of Francis's father was, according to legend. In 1613, King Philip III of Spain will purchase this property. He wants a Franciscan edifice for the Spanish people, and he will ask to have this church built over it. This, in this red circle here, you could see the edicola, which we just talked about, the little temple, the little sacred niche. And here you see two bronze statues representing the parents of Francis of Assisi. Here they are. Pietro Bernardone, Madonna Pica. She was French. Francis's father met her in France while buying and trading cloth. He was a cloth merchant. This is a contemporary sculpture in bronze by Iopolo, done not many years ago. And interesting, his father had him thrown into a cellar, given bread and water for about 10 days, they say, after Francis embraced this life of poverty, wanting to knock some sense into his son's head. And he had a mother, however, who didn't agree with that. She's holding broken chains. This is the edicola again, and I put this photo because I wanted to point out this photo was taken in August, and these poor plants have to be replanted. Many of the edicolae either have ledges where people can place flowers, or if they're very high up, they'll be hanging plants and flowers, and there's often a vigil light, which is lit especially for feast days. On the right is a maiolica image of Francis of Assisi, and we can see here some of the attributes or the symbols associated with Francis: the olive branches of peace, the doves of peace, and a bright light behind him because he was so illuminated with the Spirit of the Lord. This This was commissioned by the young Franciscans of Italy in 1959. And you can see up here, the inscription says, "To the Saint of Peace." Francis here showing that he has the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. Now, near the not too far from the first image we saw, the Madonna enthroned with Christ's child, the little edicola, is another small edicola representing Francis of Assisi. It's on the wall of a 14th century house. The edicola with the fresco itself, the edicola is an old edicola. We don't know what image was there before, but in the 19th century, the family had this image done of Francis with the wolf of Gubbio. And, excuse me for this red. At one time, I was trying to encircle it and I didn't delete it, pardon me. Anyway, Francis with the wolf of Gubbio. And the story is that a wolf was ravaging the city of Gubbio, and Francis went there to make peace, saying, "Brother Wolf, leave alone the sheep of the people of Gubbio. Citizens of Gubbio, dear Eugubini, feed Brother Wolf, he'll do no harm." This probably is an allegory, the wolf representing an aggressive city-state attacking Gubbio. This is the period of the Middle Ages. There's no unification of Italy till 1860. Every city is its own country. This is the medieval house here, probably dates to the 14th century. This is the coat of arms of the family up here. And here on the right in red is the image of St. Bernard of Siena. And his image is all over Assisi. He preached in Assisi in 1425. He was from the city of Siena. He was a Franciscan. He's living 200 years after Francis, and he's trying to restore to the people the true spirit of poverty of Francis. This is a period of full-blown Renaissance, wealth, nobility. The wealthy are getting wealthier, the poor are getting poorer, division in the classes, continual warfare between the city-states. And when he preaches, he holds up a plaque. And on the plaque are the three letters IHS, Jesus Hominum Salvatorum, Jesus Christ, Savior of mankind. Those of you who've gone to Jesuit universities or know about the Jesuits know that these letters will become the symbol of the Jesuits, founded by Ignatius of Loyola in the 1600s. Under IHS is Viva Maria. That is a V for long live, Viva, and over it is superimposed the M. So this is dedicated to Christ and to his mother. Bernard of Siena's symbol. That house is right here on the right of the Porta San Pietro. You enter it and you're at the Abbey Church of San Pietro. This again is one of the 14 porte or city gates of Assisi. And here is again the Abbey Church of San Pietro. And starting from here, Manuela told me, pilgrims would come up on their knees, going all the way to the Basilica of St. Francis, which is about another 200 yards uphill behind us. And this is a very beautiful, simple rose window of the 11th century, because again, this is the oldest church in Assisi. And I put this in here, especially for people from New York or fans of Beverly Pepper. And she's an astounding contemporary sculptress. We knew her well. She lived in Todi. She died last year at the age of 96. And this is one of her pieces here in front of the Abbey Church of San Pietro. Now, you're coming up the hill from the Abbey Church of San Pietro. These people are walking up the hill. They might be contemporary pilgrims. They're not coming up on their knees. And if they were coming up on their knees, they would be stopping right here to pray in front of this image of Bernard of Siena. And he's depicted right here next to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm here with Manuela. This was taken just the other day because this is another one of the works she restored. This is 15th century, artist not known, and I want to show you a detail of this. Let's get a close-up here of Bernard of Siena. He's holding the IHS. He held it on a wooden plaque as he preached through not just Assisi, but central Umbria, central Italy, let's say. And we can't see his face too well. He was often portrayed in portraits because people who knew what he looked like could paint him. He was living in the 15th century. He's always depicted with sunken cheeks and bald. He was toothless. So you always recognize the Franciscan with sunken cheeks. That's Bernard of Siena. Okay, he is sitting in the honored position to the right of the Blessed Virgin Mary. She no doubt had on those noble colors of red and blue, but the fresco colors have worn away with time. And Manuela cannot repaint them. That would be falsification. She can only clean what is still there. Here's Bernard of Siena, and this is some more extraordinary street art, if you will, in stone. It's a Renaissance portico right opposite the entrance to the lower Basilica of St. Francis. He's praying between two angels. Doesn't that look very much like a little bit of a temple? Because after all, Renaissance emulates the Greek and Roman structures. And that's Bernard of Siena, as he was depicted. We'll go back here. I'm going to show you now his face. There he is. You can see that. Sunken cheeks, toothless, bald, Bernard of Siena, holding up the IHS. And the IHS is over many an Assisi home. This door is beautiful pink and white limestone. The IHS is to the right of the wisteria going over this door. IHS, again, above a door. And here we have IHS over the door of a home, and you can see their family motto, Ubi Deus, ibi pax, where there is God, there is peace. This is over another home, IHS, put up there in 1639. Here we have IHS for Christ, Jesus Hominum Salvatorum, Jesus Christ, Savior of mankind, over the image of his mother, Viva, see the V? Maria. Viva Maria, long live Mary. Listen, the next time you go through Assisi, look for these things. You'd be surprised to see how many of these that you find in nooks and crannies, and not just in Assisi. Now we'll look at a contemporary IHS. This is done, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, but I wanted to put it in because we have not only the symbol of the Franciscan Bernard of Siena, but the symbol of the founder of his order, Francis of Assisi, who, when he preached to the people, said Pax et Bonum, peace and goodwill. And flanking Pax et Bonum are the doves and the olive branches, symbol of peace. And Pax et Bonum tiles are all over Assisi. This is in Maiolica, and it's under a little niche with an image of Francis of Assisi. This again is in ceramics. It's quite contemporary, not more probably than 100 years old. The Pax et Bonum tiles started to appear on the walls of Assisi in 1926, the year they celebrated the 700th anniversary of the birth of Francis, the death of Francis, October 3rd, 1226. And he is actually holding here a parchment which says Pax et Bonum in this image, in this edicola or little shrine on the wall of an Assisi home. Look at the beautiful Gothic windows with the pointed arches. These are 13th century. And up at the top, bifore or a bipartite window with trilobed arches. It's actually a beautiful home in Via San Francesco, not far from Florida. Near Bernard of Siena's image, right across from Bernard of Siena's image, on the other side of the street, is actually another fresco, very much venerated by the pilgrims, and it represents San Rocco, who was a French saint who was invoked at times at the outbreak of the bubonic plague. He was the patron saint of those suffering from plague and the saint who protected them from the Black Plague, because Roc for the French, preached through the peninsula of Italy in the 14th century at the time of the worst outbreak of the bubonic plague, 1348 to 1350, and he himself did have the plague, but he recovered. So he's pointing to a pustule on his leg, which you can't see any longer. The fresco has been ruined. He's also got a shell on his hat. He is also the patron saint of pilgrims for his walk through the peninsula of Italy preaching. Now, on the left is the left of him, his right, it's our left, is the Virgin. Look at her colors, blue and red, colors of nobility. Well, look at that Christ child. Something interesting around his neck. That's a little necklace of coral beads. Coral keeps away the evil eye so that no one who's envious of you can put a hex on you. Now, why the Son of God would have to be protected against the malocchio, I have no idea. But now and then you can see a baby Jesus with the coral beads, so he's protected against the malocchio. I'm wearing my coral tonight so that I have a good Zoom lecture. But I had those red lines in it already. That's not the perfect Zoom lecture, but we're doing our best, and on we go. Now, there's Manuela in front of San Rocco and the Virgin, and very proud of the fact that she was very proud of this restoration. She said to me, though, I'm very sorry that the colors couldn't be revived more than I was able to, because all she could do is clean. In this shop right here, interesting, under her hand, is the T-shaped cross, the Tau, that was symbol of salvation in the book of Ezekiel. Last letter in medieval Hebrew called the Taf. And that's how Francis always signed his name, with a Tau cross. Here is another image of Francis of Assisi. This is late 1800s, and the Blessed Virgin is holding the Christ child who's delicately blessing Francis. And I wanted to put this into this talk because, interestingly, it's over the door of the former oratory dedicated to the Immaculate Conception. Assisi has, at least to this day, a dozen oratories, places of prayer, ora, orare, orate, ora, to pray. What is the Benedictine motto? Ora et labore, work and prayer. And this was the confraternity meeting place of the group called the Confraternita of the Immaculate Conception. Later, the Capuchins this will be their monastery. The Capuchins here as of the late 1800s. The Capuchins are a branch of the Franciscans, and they come to be in the 1500s when they feel there is a need to return to the true spirit of Francis. Their name comes from Capuccio because the hermits wore hoods. So they're stressing the rule of poverty. They often had long beards, simple life, not attention to oneself, the Capuchins. You know something related to the Capuchins, it's called cappuccino. There's a little hood on that coffee, but it's a hood of milk. Now, this is inside the pointed arch, the symbol of the Franciscans, crossed hand of Christ with the crossed hand of Francis, both with holes. This is a fresco, not over an oratory, but over a former medieval guild hall. This is a guild hall where confraternity members met, confraternita, to be with one's brother. They were associations which undertook spiritual and social initiatives in the Middle Ages. And the history of this guild hall is quite vast. It spans centuries. In the 14th century, this was the meeting house of a confraternity, extremely interesting, called disciplinati o flagellati. The flagellati, the flagellants, were established in Perugia. His name was Fasano, I believe. Fasano established the flagellants in the 14th century. We're at full peak time of the Black Plague. And the belief was that it was man's sins, man's evil ways, man staying from the straight and narrow path, which has caused the punishment of God on man, which is the sending of the plague. And therefore, his philosophy was, let us try to discipline ourselves, do penance, to ask forgiveness. So they walked through the streets, generally men, not women, and they whipped themselves, the flagellanti. So this was the confraternity meeting hall of the disciplinati, or the flagellants. Then it becomes the meeting guild hall of the confraternity of the wool carders, because not far from here, we're talking now 15th century, were the waters of the fountains of Moiano that provided the water that the wool carders needed for the carding of the wool. Their patron was Saint Blaise, San Biagio, who was an Armenian martyr, I believe 5th century. They flayed him. They took his skin off. So he becomes the symbol or the patron of the guild of the carders of the wool. Now, under the Virgin here, you see the image of this fresco done in 1330 by Palmerino of Siena. We have the Madonna enthroned. On her right, most important position is Francis. On her left, secondary position is Claire, who tried to follow his rule as closely as she could. And under her throne, and I've encircled them, are the confraternita, the confratelli, the confraternita members, the brothers of the disciplinati, the flagellants. They're all kneeling in prayer. Alas, their images have been lost with time. On the right is Saint Blaise, San Biagio, patron saint of the guild of the wool carders. San Crispino, this is dedicated to him now. It's called the Edicola di San Crispino, was the patron saint of shoemakers. He was a Roman saint. I believe he was martyred, and he too was a cobbler. So he's the patron saint of the shoemakers. Above the Virgin, Claire, and Francis is the Lamb of God. And here, let's go back. On the right of the Virgin is Claire of Assisi. Here's a little bit of a close-up of her image. And we're not far away from the basilica where she's buried, the 13th century Basilica of St. Clare of Assisi. And here is an image of St. Blaise, who's on her right. And you can't see it very well, but he's holding the comb, symbol of the wool carders who comb their wool. Here's the fresco from the outside, and you could see that all above it and all to the left and to the left and probably also to the right of it was frescoed. This was a huge fresco of San Cristoforo, St. Christopher. Here's Manuela Elisei. This is one of her slides, which she kindly gave me. Here she is, working on the restoration of the San Crispino fresco of 1330. Let's remember, restoration means cleaning it. And here she is on the front of the building. She's finished the work that she could do on the fresco of the Madonna enthroned with Claire and Francis, and she's working on the San Cristoforo. Another image portraying Claire of Assisi and also Francis. And now what's interesting is Why is Claire on the Virgin's right and Francis on the left? That just doesn't happen in Assisi. It's Francis on her right, Claire on her left. Francis is primary, Claire is secondary. Well, Claire is primary because this fresco is on the wall of the meeting place of the Confraternita di Santa Chiarella, the association of people who belong to St. Clare. So she's given prominence here. And here is Claire. She's holding the monstrance with the sacred host. Monstrance means to show. And it said that she held it out of the window of the convent of San Damiano, where she and her consorelle, or fellow sisters, lived. And I think this was about 1209 when Saracen pirates attacked Italy. It's hard to believe that they came this far inland, but so the story goes. She held this outside the window and it scared them away. Here is that fresco, and this is quite delightful. I even have a close-up of this, but I won't read it all to you. I can sum it up now. It says, dear fellow citizens of Assisi, please indicate your respect for our Claire and our Francis by curbing your dogs. In other words, have your dogs on a leash when you're walking past this fresco. Here's another image which depicts the Blessed Virgin this time, and it is above the door of the residence or the offices of the bishop. It's attached to the bishop's palace, and this is rather contemporary, quite contemporary. It's said that this was done by a Polish refugee in 1945, but probably on a pre-existing fresco. But because the frescoes remaining to the left and right are about 15th, 16th century, it appears that the one in the middle was lost. And these are angels holding attributes of the Blessed Virgin or symbols of her: lily for purity, the cross because it's her son who will be crucified, the rose, symbol of divine love, and so forth. And this is very close to one of the most beautiful, I think, and interesting outdoor frescoes of Assisi, San Quirico. This was done in 1460. The fresco, we're going to see it in a minute. It's over the door of the Monastero delle Clarisse, the convent of the Poor Clares. During her life, the women who lived with her down at St. Damian's were called Le Damianite. And they took the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and the Poor Clares lived in cloister. The Italian word for Poor Clare is Clarisse. So in here, this is still a convent of cloistered Poor Clares. When they take their final vows, they don't come out. And over the door, entering into the Clarisse convent, is this fresco of 1460, probably, by an artist from the Foligno area, and it depicts a most unusual image. An unusual image because it's on this convent. This is La Madonna del Latte. The baby Jesus is nursing from his mother. She's in blue and red. To her right is her mother, Sant'Anna. Now, why ever this image on a convent of the Poor Clares? Probably because the Madonna del Latte, this image, was often painted on edifices which were near a water source, because it said a miraculous water source would help mothers to nurse their children better. It would increase their milk flow. And this convent is actually built over the site of the Roman baths, which was very rich in water. The other reason for this image could be that the main convent of the Franciscan sisters, called the tertiaries, they were lay women who tried to live the Franciscan life, was in Foligno. That was the mother house. This was another branch of it. So this is probably done as a respect for the mother house of this group of Franciscans called tertiary, lay women, nobility often, who wanted to follow the rule of Clare and Francis. And here we see, again, the blues and reds typical of the nobility. And I wanted to point out this. I couldn't get a good image of this fresco here. To their right is Francis of Assisi. To their left is San Quirico. Now, who was he? San Quirico was a Roman saint martyred along with his mother at about the age of 5. So he's the patron saint of children. And he was a child martyr. Now, I want to say something right now. When I look at this, I think of the small children who looked up at this fresco as they went in to be closed in there, not knowing really what they were probably seeing. What children were these? The Jewish refugees hidden here in Assisi, 1943 to 1944. And some of these refugees, parents and children, were hidden in this convent of the Poor Clares, Le Clarisse. And not too far from here, doors away, is the Museo della Memoria. That has to be part of a future lecture. The Museum of Memory, about Assisi's extraordinary and successful effort to hide 300 Jewish refugees in our town during World War II. So it's interesting that those little children would have looked up here at this image of the Blessed Virgin nursing her child, and at the image of San Quirico, little child martyr, the saint who cares for children. It's amazing, isn't it, to think about it? Here's another image of the Virgin with the Christ child, and she is blessing Francis of Assisi. And this is probably from about the 17th century. I wanted to put this up because it's interesting, the dedication under it. This was dedicated, and I think it was put up it was about 1958. The restoration was done by a Japanese woman as a thanks for her happy and fruitful years in Assisi. What I don't understand from this plaque was, and it's all written in Japanese too, what I don't understand from the plaque was, did the Japanese woman actually restore it, or did she pay for the restoration? I wanted to include this fresco because I'd like you to meet Rui, who is a Japanese art restorer working in Assisi now. And she's working on the fresco of the little church of San Gregorio. She told me that she and her companion fresco artist worker, Sylvia, have been working since August, and they may finish by the end of September. And this is Rui. They're on scaffolding here above the door of this church. Rui just looking at the fresco, studying it, looking at the work she's done, probably contemplating how she's done it, how much longer it might take. And right across the street is the home of San Bernardo da Quintavalle. He was one of the first followers of Francis. The plaque over the door tells us why he left the wealth of this home to follow Francis. He invited Francis for dinner. He gave him a room to sleep in. He pretended he was asleep, but he woke up and he went to spy on Francis. And Francis was praying and prayed all night, and Bernardo saw him levitate. And the next day he left everything to follow Francis of Assisi. Here is another fresco in which, oddly enough, Francis is on the left of the Virgin. Who could be more important than Francis? Rufinus, first Christian bishop of Assisi. This is outside the Cathedral of San Rufino, where he is buried. He was martyred in 238 AD after a grisly series of tortures, which we won't go into, just after your lunch or before your lunch. And they finally drowned him in the Tescio River below Assisi. And there he is with the crozier of the bishop and the bishop's mitre. And he is to the right of the Virgin, because after all, this is on his church. This fresco is by Donodoni. He's quite a well-known Assisi painter of the 17th century, 1600s is Donodoni. And here's Francis of Assisi with his hands crossed in humility. Francis here in his usual position to the right of this crucifixion, Claire is to the left. This is a crucifixion scene, which probably places an original fresco, which was in this niche and lost. The frescoes in the arch and on the walls are older. This is leading down to the Church of Santo Stefano. This fresco is about 17th century. And you can see it here. Above the fresco of Francis and Clare and the crucifixion is the Annunciation. This is the angel Gabriel who's asking the Virgin, who you can barely see, to be the Mother of God. I wanted to point this out because this fellow is walking right down to the steps of the beautiful Church of Santo Stefano. It's in the back streets of Assisi. People rarely go see it. It dates to the 12th century. It's said that the bells rang miraculously on October 3rd, 1226, as Francis lay dying. Down in the valley, here's the bell tower of Santo Stefano. This is not the 13th century bell tower. This has been replaced. And he died under the dome of what is today the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels, 3 kilometers below Assisi. And they say the bells rang miraculously as he lay dying the evening of October 3rd, 1226. Near the Church of Santo Stefano is one of the Benedictine churches of Assisi, dedicated to St. Paul. This is Paul here with his symbols, the sword, which you can hardly see because he was beheaded, and the book reminding us of the many letters he wrote to his followers. And on his left, probably on his right, would have been Francis of Assisi. We don't know. On his left is Lorenzo Giustiniani, who was the Patriarch of Venice. He was Benedictine. The Bishop of Venice is called a Patriarch, and they are allowed to wear the red hats as the cardinals do. He was Patriarch of Venice in the 16th century. And next to it is the entrance to the former Benedictine convent, which is now a private home. This arch dates from the 12th century. And we must mention the Monte Frumentario, the beautiful loggia here, Byzantine columns, all done in the 14th century, very much influenced by artists from the Middle East. And look at this beautiful border here of tri-lobed arches. I want to mention this because it's a very interesting place, Monte Frumentario. This was an ancient hospital in past times. The back is no longer there. One of the oldest hospitals in Italy, probably a hospital as of the 12th, 13th century. And then in the 15th century, it becomes Monte Frumentario, the Mount of Wheat. It is where farmers could borrow wheat. It's a rural pawn shop, if you will, which they needed to seed to have crops for the next year. They wouldn't have had enough wheat to seed. Why not? They were poor. They ate all the wheat and barley that they had. So here they could borrow wheat at very low interest rates so that they'd be able to seed grains for the following year. And this Monte Frumentario was the idea of a Cardinal Barberini. Their symbol is the bees. Bees are industrious. You may be familiar with a famous Barberini who had Palazzo Barberini built in Rome. That was Urban VIII, I believe the brother of Antonio Barberini. Antonio Barberini was only a cardinal. See the cardinal's hat? And his coat of arms was the Barberini bees plus the symbol of Francis because he was a Franciscan. And there's Clare to the right. And another fresco in the Monte Frumentario is of 3 saints, not easily identifiable. Now, we can't finish talking about the frescoes in Assisi. We've talked about a few. There are over 40 to 50 outdoor fresco images in Assisi. We've talked about a few of them. And we can't conclude our discussion of the spiritual frescoes with spiritual motifs without mentioning the oldest in Assisi is in a back street above San Rufino called Via Madonna delle Rose, Our Lady of the Roses. There's a church up here at the entrance to the door, which has been here since the 13th century, probably maybe a little bit sooner. And this fresco was done over the door in the mid-13th century. You can see the stonework in white limestone over the door. Some of it seems to be Lombard design. The Longobards came from northern Italy. Milano was is still the capital of Lombardia. They were noted for their stonemasonry work, but some of the pieces are probably also from Roman columns and Roman architraves, because where the Cathedral of San Rufino is today, there were Roman temples. And here is that image of the oldest fresco in Assisi. How Byzantine looking is she? We don't know who the artist was, but the artist had to have been probably from the Middle East. We've talked about the spiritual themes of many of the frescoes of Assisi. And now we absolutely must talk about the themes of the grotesque frescoes of Assisi. This is the frescoed vault of Assisi, the Volta Pinta, the painted vault. It's right in the main square. It is about 100 square meters of delightful frescoes painted in 1556. And we see at the top here of the painted vault the coat of arms of the Pope who commissioned the work, Paul IV. The painted vault is right here on the main square for those who've been in Assisi, and it is part of the Palazzo Comunale, or the municipal building. This square is called the Palace of the Municipality, if you will. And this building here dates to about the 15th century, but there was an edifice here in the 13th century. The city of Assisi bought casalline, small houses, and they united them together to build this palace. And on the upper level of this building, in 1556, when the vault was being painted, lived the governor of the Pope, Marcello Tutti, and he commissioned these frescoes. Remember, this is Papal States. So the papal governor, Marcello Tutti, lived just above. And here you can see the frescoed vault at night. You don't see much of the fresco, but this is quite a lovely photo of the main square of Assisi, Palazzo Comunale, 14th to 15th century. All these buildings are part of the municipality, of the municipal buildings of Assisi. And someone observing the frescoes at night. Now, in 1456, the papal governor of the city ordered a wall built here, because this was the passageway for gentlemen going to seek evening pleasures. The brothel was back here. And in fact, it's interesting that many of the themes in this fresco are very erotic. And you're wondering if sometimes they were not done to entertain people on their way to certain evening pleasures. On the painted vault is, of course, the coat of arms of Marcello Tutti. He is the papal governor at the time when this is frescoed, 1556, and he was from the city of Siena. His coat of arms is always of two clubs sprouting vegetation, and we're going to see this image again and even a bit closer so you can get a better idea of it. Here you see the painted vault. This was the wall that was built in 1462 to stop passage through to the public brothels. Like, the public brothels were still there, but one went around. And under this vault in the 1500s, 1700s, there was the market of the grains, markets of vegetables, a lot of vendors of fruits and crafts and so forth worked under this vault. Here's some people walking past the painted vault. Now, just opposite it is the temple to the goddess Minerva. 100 BC, next to it is the city bell tower, 13th century, but the top here is a nice medieval addition ordered by our fascist mayor in 1926 to keep up the falsely medieval spirit of the city of Assisi. Next to the bell tower is the 14th century palace of the captains of the people. He was basically the medieval police chief, kept order, levied fines to custody of prisoners. Now, this work is called Grotesque. Grotesque means as in a grotto, grotto-ish. What's the origin of grotesque? They're imitative of the fresco work of the stunning Golden House of Nero. Built in 64 AD, Nero was ordering the building of his villa. These are some more details of the Golden House of Nero, Domus Aurea, which I don't know if you can see now. I was able to see it years ago, and then they closed it for a period because of moisture entering in. It is absolutely not to miss if it's open and if you're in Rome. Nero, and here's some more details of the grotesque, the decorative motif of the Roman villas. What he did after the fire of 64 AD, Rome burned 6 days and 7 nights. On the earth left and so forth, the ash and everything left after so much of Rome burnt. he decided to create his villa, the Golden Villa. It was built on about 400 acres of land. It was so vast that the lake of the Domus Aurea was the area where the Colosseum now is. Work went on till 68 AD when he died, and it was never finished. How was it discovered? In 1480, a young Roman man walking the hill called Collioppio actually stepped into a crevice by accident, fell into this grotto, and saw this. Word got out. The painters coming to Rome at the time were terribly enthused. After all, this is the Renaissance, when we have tremendous appreciation for everything associated with the Greeks and Romans and antiquity, and they are going to get into the grottos. They're lowered into those caves, they thought, because it had been covered over with earth over the centuries, on wooden boards. They're sitting on wooden boards, lowered with ropes. They write their names on the ceiling of the Domus Aurea. I saw, our guide showed us, the name of Raphael, the name of Pinturicchio. And Raphael so enthused that this beautiful loggia in the Vatican palace was inspired by the Grotesque. This is Raphael, early 16th century. Perugino was enthralled. And look at the Grotesque in his ceiling of the Collegio del Cambio, which he frescoed with many of his school and his students in the early 16th century in Perugia. Pinturicchio's name was written on the ceiling. And some of you have been with me to Spello to see the stunning frescoes of Pinturicchio. His name means little painter, but nothing little about his skill, who frescoed from 1501 to 1503. Look at the Grotesque motif on the columns here behind the Virgin's Annunciation. Look at the Grotesque motif on his nativity. Even the stall, the columns seem to be columns of a Roman temple, the Grotesque motif. Nero's villa was not the first to be decorated with grotesque motifs. Augustus's villas too. Early first century BC, villas of Pompeii. For those who've been to Pompeii, note that their decorations of their walls have this kind of painting that we call today grotesque. These fun, flaunting images of history, mixture of mythology of the Greeks and Romans, but combined with symbols of plants, of vegetation, erotic symbols at times. Signorelli decorated the chapel of San Brizio in Orvieto with grotesque. This is Signorelli, early 16th century. Luca Signorelli was from Cortona and worked in Orvieto as well. Now we return to Assisi. This is a section of the painted vault, rich in grotesque. And here's Manuela. She restored the painted vault, I believe, in 2002, and she's working on the vines, which are on this kind of trellis over a villa on the ceiling, and right near her is an image of the myth or the story of the contest between Apollo and Marsyas. And Marsyas challenged Apollo to a musical contest, saying that whoever wins could do to the loser whatever he wishes. And Marsyas played his flute and everybody was dancing and they were all frantic. And then Apollo played his lyre and everybody just listened quiet and they were all at peace. And it was declared that Apollo was the winner. So he had Marsyas flayed. And here's Marsyas being flayed. Under the image is Marcellus's name here, Tutti, senator and governor for the popes. And I want to show you this. This is before Restoration, and here is after Restoration by Manuela. The painted vault, 1556. Who did the painting? Raphael Pictor, as you can see. A painter known as Raphael the Painter, could have been Raffaellino del Colle of the area of Borgo San Sepolcro. We're not sure. Another myth here another myth will appear as well, a Greek myth. And before we go to see it, I want to show you here. The rings are around the symbol of Marcello Tutti. These are clubs with vegetation growing out of them, and they are his family's coat of arms. Another Greek myth, which is depicted in the painted vault, is that of Icarus. Icarus was the son of Daedalus, and his father made for him wings of wax and feathers. And Icarus decided that he would fly, and he was going to fly close to the sun. He flew too close to the sun. The wings came apart, the wax melted. Probably this symbolizes for the people that arrogance can lead to your downfall. The same message in this here in the myth of Apollo and Marsyas. So Marcello Tutti's has the artist depict on the painted vault rules of behavior for those that he's governing. Avoid arrogance. Here is Icarus falling to the ground. Here he is flying before his wings melt. Look at here, the clubs, which are the symbol of the papal governor, Marcello Tutti. Marcello Tutti symbols here, and the turkeys, maybe the first ever painted. They come from the New World in 1492. Here they are on the painted vault of Assisi. The people probably enjoyed the meat, but they also could symbolize arrogance and pride because of the way they fan out their feathers. The dragon often symbolizes evil and is equated with the devil. Here you see the turkeys before and after restoration. Because what she did, you could say, but the color's lighter now. What Manuela had to do was take away the painting done by Venanzi, an Assisano, who was given the task of restoring in the 1900s, but he repainted. So she had to take off Venanzi's work when she restored. This is another Greek myth depicted, which is Phaetonte. Phaetonte falling out of the sky. Phaetonte was the son of Helios, the god of the sun, and Helios allowed his son to drive his chariot, but he was imprudent. He drove it too close to the sun. As a result, the earth burned, and Zeus, in his anger, sent a lightning bolt which struck down Phaetonte. In this section of the painted vault, we see the rearing lion, coat of arms of the city of Assisi. Many birds are depicted. The ibis symbolizes divine knowledge. Here we have possibly a self-portrait of Raffaellino Pictore, or Raphael Pictore, the painter. Birds figure frequently in the painted vault and all over. This is the, I think you call it in English, hupo. It's upupa in Italian. And the hupo signifies cleverness in Renaissance art. You can even see a nest of small birds. The small birds in a nest represent the unity of family. And here are the birds up on the painted vault. And below them, men on rings, 4 and 3, possibly representing the 7 capital sins. Over here, we have those turkeys. Over here to the right, masks. The masks symbolize deception. So a warning to be open-eyed, be careful of the people with whom you undertake relationships. And down here, we have a naked woman. It could represent Venus. It's not known, however. Look at the birds here and the monkeys. Monkeys represented 2 things. They could represent just simple playfulness and of somebody wealthy enough to have them as pets, but they also could have represented deception. And here we have in the rings here, but you can barely see them, are the coats of arms of the governor. Another bird, the owl. The owl for Renaissance man represented actually deception. not wisdom as it will represent later. Here is the owl. And this figure is a simple playful figure here. This figure is an erotic figure. And we're going to see a close-up of it restored by Manuela. There were many, many erotic images in the papal vaults. In this papal, what we call it the papal vault, the painted vault, the volta pinta. There it is. This is open to your own interpretation. Raphael Pictor, 1556, the Volta Pinta. This is after Manuela's restoration. This too is open to your own interpretation. If you look between the legs of this person with the head of a goat. Another erotic image. This donkey, he's actually probably going to be kicked by a fox. And this is the image right here. This is a fox here. Another delightful bird, the coat of arms of the city of Assisi, the ibis, and this is Marcello Tutti's symbol, the club. Warning, really. Behave, or something might be coming your way called the club. The beating with a club. One of the last images I want to mention is this temple here. Is it the temple to Minerva? We can't know. There's a statue in front of it. Was there a statue in front of the Temple of Minerva in 1556? There's the temple today. Maybe it was depicted in the painted vault. Maybe it was part of the Grotesque. Here are the Grotesque here. So you can see that this lovely Minerva temple is right in front of it. To be seen on your next trip to Assisi, if you haven't already been here. And don't miss going across the street to spending a lot of time looking at the delightful painted vault and trying to decide for yourself what all the symbolism means, what all the stories are telling us. Thank you very much for joining us for Assisi's medieval street art from the sacred to the grotesque. As I mentioned, the video will be on my website in a couple days. This is my website here. Most of you know this is the website of the apartments that we rent here in the countryside and in the town. Let's hope you can come soon and stay with us. And thank you very much.